And welcome back to Everyday Economics, a podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics and other podcasts such as this one, please make your tax-deductible charitable contributions by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on Thursday, February 2nd. And joining me as always, my friend, the ubiquitous economist who carries the pretty heavy degree, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. Dr. O, man, I'll tell you what, it's getting tough out there. You got businesses that are like looking at what's going on, looking at their balance sheets, looking at the staff, especially management, and saying, hey, you know what? We're carrying a lot of, maybe a little bit of flab hanging over the side of our belts here. So we're going to tighten it up. Looks like some people are just getting clipped.
First of all, I want to say, look, the tech sector has taken a hit for sure. And I feel terrible for the families that are impacted, but it's not just tech anymore, right? So, it's going everywhere now, right? So companies that grew too rapidly during the pandemic, some companies that all of a sudden, after years and years of never really laying off employees, are starting to see demand weaken. And that demand weakness is forcing them to readjust to the new economic reality. And so, yeah, I feel terrible for the families that are affected. But I have to add something here, before we go any further with this. Layoffs broadly remain very low, even when compared to any time before the pandemic. So I think this is something that is missed, right? That the fact that the reason employment is still growing, even though employment growth has slowed, the reason employment is still growing in the United States is because we are hiring more people than are being let go. And so the slowdown in employment growth is mostly due to a decrease in hiring, not much of an uptick in layoffs. In fact, if you look at initial jobless claims are actually down below the forecast, below economists' expectations. So yes, some people are being laid off. The good news is in a hot labor market, in a labor market that's still somewhat hot compared to normal, a lot of people are able to find new jobs. I guess that's the good part of this story, is that people are still able to find jobs at a pretty rapid pace, because even though the labor market is cooling, it's still somewhat hot relative to what we've ever had before.
Right. But some of the names on the list and the companies that are on the list, and you look at them, they're kind of like, wow, man, I wouldn't have thought that I would assume that these companies would have continued growth. I mean, one of them, obviously these are not any kind of hierarchical order, but it's kind of moving around. Like Impossible Foods is cutting a lot of people, and not just in the managerial ranks, but across the board. Of course, we've been talking just in general about companies that are like overperforming or surprisingly performing, and others that aren't doing so hot. But Bed Bath & Beyond has been having problems for a long time. And so that's not really a mystery. But it was just today that FedEx announced that it's trimming its global management team. So these are executive level jobs inside of a multinational company that is, FedEx isn't, they're an industry leader, right?
Of course. And the thing is, FedEx, most packages you get at home end up on a FedEx plane or a UPS plane, right? And so the fact that FedEx is cutting jobs is worrisome in terms of where the economy as a whole is headed, right? Goods consumption of goods has decreased a lot. Right? Consumer spending on goods has decreased a lot. Services, same thing, is starting to decrease. U.S. manufacturing is contracting for the third month in a row. So all of that is likely playing a big role in the struggles that these companies are facing. And so, yes, I think that all of this kind of reflect the weakness, the weakness in the economic data that we've talked about on the podcast. Now, what worries me a little bit is that a lot of these layoffs, these high profile layoffs, are the layoffs of higher income workers, right? So, you look at the tech sector, you look at that, right? And you look at all these companies, they tend to be higher income workers. And if higher income workers are getting laid off right now, and luckily I said they're able to find jobs again, but But if these workers start to worry a little bit and pull back on their spending, that might actually have a disproportionate drag on consumer spending.
And that would make a lot of sense. I mean, those who have the most spend the most typically.
Exactly. And that would actually drag down U.S. consumer spending further, resulting in potentially a broader economic slowdown and layoffs in other industries that are still somewhat hiring and are still doing well right now.
We have an opportunity for one last question, and I want to just pose this to you. You know, the first major tech company that announced sweeping layoffs was Twitter after Elon Musk's acquisition. I don't remember what the final tally was, but it was a significant portion of those employed at Twitter, 25% or more. I'll tell you, Twitter seems to be working just fine. Do you think that was kind of the siren's call to the tech industry that, hey, you know what? Bigger isn't necessarily better. We might be a better company if we're a little bit leaner. If we have, sort of things going on inside of our companies that are not core to the mission, that we don't need them and we certainly shouldn't be funding them. Can we do, not to say more with less? I come from the newspaper industry. The idea of doing more with less, that is complete baloney. But if you have people that are not working your plan and are not rowing in the same direction, you may be better without them. Do you think that might be part of what's happening inside of the tech sector?
I don't know. I don't think I would agree. I mean, Twitter's not doing well since Musk took over. In fact, Fidelity marked down its Twitter shares by 60% since the takeover. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree that Twitter is doing well. And I think that companies should really be careful about letting go of workers. And I think they should be thinking about preparing for the return, for the comeback from the upturn in economic activity, right? I think a lot of companies are choosing to lay off workers because it helps them cut some costs, which would be then good for their stock, for shareholders. They cut costs in the near term. That might seem like the smart thing to do. But over the long term, they're letting go of really talented people who would end up going and work for their competitors. And so when the economy turns, which it will, right? So we're seeing we saw a slowdown in 2022 and we're seeing some weakness in 2023 at the start of the year. But it also means that potentially, right, eventually we will see that Fed pivot. And if we don't see that Fed pivot, the economy will recover. And when it does, if you're a leader out there, you would want to have those talented workers in your corner because they're the ones that helped you build that company in the first place. And that's where I'm going to kind of sign off and say, look, you got to be careful. You got to prepare yourself. Usually recessions are opportunities, are places where you start to think about the future, about potential growth. You want to grab as many of those assets that will help you turn the corner. And so I think that, this short-sighted, short-minded thinking about the near term is not going to help a lot of companies.
I appreciate your thoughts as always. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other quality podcasts at americastalking.com.